Hello and welcome to the Jewish Heretics Podcast. This is the official podcast of the United Jewish People's Order. We are a secular, progressive Canadian Jewish organization that's been around since the 1920s. My name is David Wall, and I am the community's cultural programmer. I will be your host today. For this, the 16th episode of our podcast, I had the honor of speaking to two members of the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, Oriel Eisner and Dina Chizhik. Oriel is an American-Israeli activist living in Haifa. He's an on-the-ground organizer with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, and for the last 10 years has been involved in anti-apartheid activism and solidarity work, primarily in the Masafriyata region in the West Bank. Dina is an American-Israeli activist living in Jerusalem. She is also an on-the-ground organizer with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, has previously worked at the human rights organization B'Tselem, and is involved in various grassroots anti-apartheid and solidarity organizing collectives, primarily in Jerusalem and in the West Bank. In our wide-ranging discussion, Oriel and Dina described their own activist histories, their incredible solidarity work, the necessity of deferring to Palestinian voices, and the current state of the left in Israel-Palestine. Here's our conversation. Oriel and Dina, thanks so much for taking time out to be on our podcast. How are you guys today?
Good. Thank you, David. It's good to be here.
Excellent. And just tell me where you are exactly.
I'm in Haifa, and Dina's in Jerusalem. I was born here in Israel. My dad is Israeli and my mom is American. And when I was pretty young, my family moved to the U.S. So I grew up in Colorado. Yeah.
And I grew up in New Jersey.
New Jersey. I've been there.
Yeah.
So the main focus of this podcast is basically how different people live their radical, heretical Jewish selves. And you two are perfect for this because I think in many ways, from what I've heard, the entire history of this podcast, I think you guys are the most radical Jewish people in terms of your actual on-the-ground action. So you're perfect for this podcast. I'd like to ask you, both of you, to talk about your upbringings a bit, like what your sort of Jewish origin stories. You've talked about where you were born, but can you talk about how you grew up? Did you grow up in religious households? Did you grow up in Zionist households? Maybe start with you, Oriel.
Sure. Yeah, so like I said, I was born in Israel. My dad is Israeli and his whole family is here. And my mom is American and her whole family, aside from a distant cousin, is in the US. And when I was pretty young, my family moved to Colorado. And yeah, for the first for the first years of education, elementary school, preschool, I was in Jewish schools. I went to Jewish day school until the end of 5th grade, and then switched over to public schools, and continued in BBYO youth group and Jewish summer camp, a summer camp that was run by a Reform synagogue in the Denver area. And I think in a lot of ways grew up in a smaller city Jewish experience. Like, it's not the same sort of Jewish community experiences you get in some of the bigger cities in the US, but a pretty mainstream Jewish community experience in many ways, with the familial connection to Israel. So my family, every year growing up, we would come to visit my dad's family and stay when I was younger, for a month at a time. And as I got older, as my siblings got older, it became a little bit harder to work out scheduling-wise, but we spent, at least every year a visit here, and usually a good chunk. So I think I had that sort of dual experience, and I think that dual experience was Zionist outside and also Zionist inside, to answer the question. But it was also my mother's family is and was quite involved in the reform movement in the U.S. So it was also very much steeped in the reform movement world and way of thinking about Judaism, and that, brings in very immediately notions of tikkun olam and social justice as a part of what it means to be Jewish, and asking questions and being critical as a part of what it means to be Jewish. So that was always there. But as far as Israel is concerned, I think, my experience, my relationship to it was pretty Zionist Jewish mainstream. With that like extra familial connection, sense of personal memory and nostalgia and family connection to this place.
What about you, Dina?
Yeah, so I grew up in Orthodox community in New Jersey. And yeah, I mean, very religious Zionist community or communities. My parents came to the States in 1980 from the Soviet Union, became religious here and in Israel, and having spent a lot of time in Israel, they became religious, raised my sisters and I in an Orthodox Jewish community in New Jersey, where we went to school. I went to Yeshiva University afterwards. And yeah, I mean, the norm was amongst most people, very, very Zionist, in a religious Zionist way. And yeah, that's in a nutshell. But we spent a lot of time talking about Israel. It was definitely the norm that people in the community spent a lot of time in Israel. It was the norm, something that people looked up to, or people who made Aliyah, people who joined the army. Many people in my community would, it was also the norm that people could move to settlements or at least go to seminary. Most people were going to seminary their gap year after completing high school. There's a year of religious studies in a religious seminary in Israel. Maybe like 98% of people that I went to school with would do that. And yeah, I mean, Israel was a really huge part of our life and our daily conversation, as was, tied in with conversations about anti-Semitism and us vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And yeah, so it's definitely very much part of the day-to-day.
It's so interesting because it's the exact opposite of my upbringing, both of you. I grew up in a non-Zionist household. I didn't attend Hebrew school. Yiddish was much more in my consciousness than Hebrew. It's just so interesting. To hear you guys, it's almost exotic for me. But it's utterly fascinating. And I'd like you guys to just before we talk about the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, I'd like to get a further sense of you guys. Can you talk about your moments of radicalization around Palestine and maybe other things as well? When did that happen? Was it a gradual change in you guys? Was it sudden? Was there a particular moment that you remember? Maybe starting with you, Dina?
Yeah, sure. It's hard to pinpoint a moment. I would say that even growing up where I did, I think I always had some questions. And I'll say that even though, my parents and I, have different perspectives on this issue, they definitely taught me and my sisters to think critically, ask a lot of questions, not really, as people who had fled the Soviet Union were quite suspicious of collective narratives. And so I think I was asking some questions that my peers were not from an earlier age. But I would say that, when I came here, I think I was already at a point where I had already, I had been Googling, B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence and these different organizations and trying to understand what was going on. It was unclear because we were taught that, these organizations and the left in general is lying about everything, and you can't trust anything they say. And so it's very difficult to understand like what is actually happening, whose information is accurate, who's telling the truth. But I think coming here, I already did have a general feeling of, okay, this seems like, to me, it seemed like, an unfortunate conflict between two sides. There's a lot of miscommunications. I'm sure that Israel also maybe does things that are not the best, but it's trying, like that kind of understanding of things. And when I was the longer, like when I like maybe in my first few years of living here, especially after moving to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem, I would say that if you're looking, if you know to look, it is very, very apparent what is happening here.
Mm.
I mean, it's like a microcosm, similar in ways to the way Hebron is, microcosm of what's going on here. And I started kind of being introduced to other people. It was also the time when the nation state law was passed. And at that time, I was very shocked by the nation state law. I was, you know, like I was appalled that that could be happening. Today I understand that the reality that the nation state law described was already in place for a long time, and this was just kind of a formalization of it, of the reality that was already existing. But to me at that time, it was like shocking. And then slowly I started meeting people, and I started going with people that I was meeting to the West Bank to see things, and I kind of inadvertently got involved in some activist groups that not that I didn't intend to, but I kind of, agreed to do one thing, but I wasn't really sure how I felt. And before you know it, you've seen things that you can't unsee, and you you can't explain away.
Mhm.
And I think at some point, I began to understand that there's nothing unfortunate and accidental about what is happening here,
Mm.
and understanding that, yeah, what's happening here is not a mistake. It's actually there's a system in place that is uh, creating this situation. And I think once I understood that, like the legal and political systems behind it, together with seeing things on the ground with what's actually happening to people and meeting people who are living this experience, Palestinians, I mean, that I was meeting at that time. Once I began to understand that it was not kind of an unfortunate accident of fate versus just
By
the
design.
consequences of
Yeah.
policy,
Hmm. Hmm.
then I think that's when things really started shifting. And then
Just
it all kind of
yeah.
slippery slope from there.
How much of a rupture was it with, say, your family and friends? Uh, how did your family react to this activism?
Yeah, it was difficult to say the least.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, it was difficult. We don't see eye to eye on the subject. And I think, at this point we've done a lot of work to, maintain our relationship. My parents, um, they love me very much. They care about me. And they absolutely disagree.
Mm.
And the same, the same both ways.
Mm.
But yeah, it was definitely difficult, and there was like a lot of I had to make a lot of changes um in a lot of aspects of my life, once it actually ruptured. But
Hmm.
I mean, thank God I'm still, in a good relationship with my family, and they know. I don't think they want to hear about it so much, but yeah.
Well, yeah, in some ways, this is wonderful and lucky because, of course, we know activists and we know people who have had to break from their families or break from their friends, and in a much more damaging way. Um, Oriel, can you talk about your radicalization around Palestine and how it developed, or was it sudden, or can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think for me it was I have like a few standout moments that marked turning points, but I think it was pretty gradual. I think sort of different than Dina, I'm very lucky to have a family who's quite supportive, especially my immediate family. And I think that allowed my journey to be gradual and held pretty well. Um, and it was a mutual journey also. Like I think that my radicalization, politicization around this issue has also affected my parents and my siblings and my more extended family.
Wow, wow.
But I think, yeah, for me, like I said, I grew up in a space where the Jewish community around me was telling me that Israel was great and something to be proud of, and my family experience was telling me that Israel was something to feel connected to and be proud of. And it started shaking a bit in high school. I had a good friend of mine whose family was from Iraq, and I think it was probably the Lebanon War was maybe the first incident, Gaza 2008, another of, oh, wait a second, this person who I know well and trust thinks differently than everyone else I'm talking to about what's going on here. What's the deal? And then I remember with the Gaza 2008, there was an event at my family's synagogue that I went to, and there was a protester who uh, interrupted in the middle of whatever talk was happening in the synagogue. And then, as I was leaving, a friend and I were walking past the protesters, and one of them shouted at us that we were Nazis.
Oh boy.
And I really had no idea what to do with that. My friend reacted pretty aggressively, and I was just kind of shocked. I was speechless. And yeah, I think it sort of just left me wondering, how is it possible, from all that I know from my upbringing and my own family history about the Holocaust, about what Nazism was, and all I've been told about Israel and what Israel is, how do I square this circle? How do I make sense of the fact that this was what the protesters were shouting at us? And I don't think I then found the answer, but that I think pushed me toward really trying to figure it out and work it out. And like I said, I think my family, my dad in particular, is a pretty voracious reader and talks himself about how when he left Israel, he left the brainwashing and went through his own process of reading and learning and hearing different perspectives. So at first he was giving me resources to read and things to watch to help me along the way. And then as I got older and got more politicized in general at university, I started connecting more to activist communities, to political communities that were talking about this issue, and reached a point where I felt like I had to just come here for myself and figure out, what do I think about what's going on here politically? Also, what do I think about what's going on here personally, and how do I relate to it personally and politically? So in 2015, right after I finished a master's, I got on a plane a week later, and I was here for a year. And during that year, I got connected to on the ground organizing and activism, and actually connected to CJNV. That's when I started, getting involved with CJNV, the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, and haven't really looked back since.
It's interesting. There's myths and myth making all over the world, and one of the sort of myths I have is that the Jewish left, and it's not just me, a lot of people, I think, among my peers feel this way, that the Israeli left is anemic or even moribund, that there's, it's almost a cliche that there's no Israeli left anymore of any significance. What would you say to that? Is there a large, active, and potent left Israeli population?
I think numbers are hard to, I don't know, if Oriel, you have a sense of numbers and scale. I feel like with that question, I'm always unsure about, in terms of exactly how many people are there. I think it depends on how you define the left. I will say, in terms of our corner of organizing, it's not a very big group, kind of circle or circles of people, but I will say it's very vibrant, dynamic, and quite significant. And I'm not just talking about our intimate circle of CJNV, but also the concentric circles. There's a lot of people here who are doing really important work, and they're up against something that is much bigger and much stronger than them.
Mm.
But I would say there's quite a vibrant community here that is working against apartheid, against occupation, and for a better future here. I don't know, Oriel, please add or
Yeah,
subtract.
no, I mean, I think that the last word there, Dina added apartheid. I mean, I think you can put other metrics there. You can talk about like recognizing the Nakba. You can talk about all sorts of markers that signal whether or not someone, if you define left in that way, whether or not someone fits as left. And I think people who are willing to say that it's apartheid, people who are willing to talk about the Nakba, talk about Palestinian refugees. It's not a huge slice by any means. You know, we of course wish we were bigger, but
Mm.
yeah, I like to think and joke with people that like we're small but mighty. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's vibrant. There's very active groups of Israelis in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, also in Haifa. There's groups, also not in the bigger cities. Folks who are doing solidarity work similar to what CJNV does all across the West Bank and also within 48. Really cool stuff that's happening.
Right.
But it's a small slice. It's definitely not a huge number.
What kind of risks do activists that you know and yourselves face in Israeli society right now? Again, we have a sense over here. I have a sense, whether it's true or not, that Israel is kind of repressive around activism and is really cracking down. And is that true? Do you guys face risks as activists from Israel itself?
I think that, I mean, at the end of the day, the bottom line, like Israel as a state is set up to privilege and protect Jews. And I think that affords us immense protections.
Mm.
And those things I think have shifted a lot over the last 5-10 years. Like I think that and we think about this in terms of our work, and this is when I say our, I mean both in the CJNB context and also the Israeli activists who we're connected to, and that we're trying to leverage that privilege. We're trying to take advantage and use that privilege against itself in many ways.
Right.
That if we're standing with Palestinians in a protest, if we're standing with Palestinians, shepherds, and the army comes, like, or the police come, it looks different. It plays out differently. I think that, bottom line to me, that feels true, but I think how true it is has waned quite a bit over the last years. Like if I think back to, 5-10 years ago, the army, the police, were maybe more wary of arresting Israeli activists, certainly of arresting American Jews. We had a delegation in 2016 where we overheard the police saying, like, don't touch the American Jews.
Wow.
And that is certainly not the case anymore. I think, in terms of the risks that we face now, obviously it still is quite minor in comparison to what all of the Palestinians living on this land and who we work with face. But it's, there is more repression. There is more ease of arresting us, of violence being carried out against us and nothing happening, whether that be from settlers or from army or the police. There have been more incidents of, the sort of state repression that maybe used to be only for Palestinians creeping into Israeli Jewish society as well. And again, it all pales in comparison to what Palestinians face, but it does. We do feel that shifting, and then there's also the social cultural impact of it. Like I think everyone has their own family stories around how their politics relate to their family, and also the society around us does not really support what we do. So if you organize a protest, even in a place like Tel Aviv, that's meant to be thought to be a liberal bubble, and it's talking about the genocide in Gaza or stopping the war, then there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get heckled, spit at, potentially physically harassed. And that's Tel Aviv, not to mention how violent and how virulent it can be in Jerusalem or some other places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just add that definitely we've seen that police tactics have gotten much more violent against the Israeli left over time. Again, still, as Oriel said, um, still much less when compared to what Palestinians experience from the police and the army. But definitely, if we look like over a span of time in the past few years, the violence has gotten worse and the repression of protests. But also, yeah, I mean, in since October 7th, there's also been for those who are more maybe connected to Israeli society at large, for example, those who work in schools or other public um, public services and things like that. There's been for anyone who's not for anyone, but there have been many cases and more than ever before of people who, if they're speaking out against what is going on, whether it's on Facebook or at an event or something like that, that there are increasing repercussions for that, including there's been instances of suspension or being fired. Again, that is definitely the case with Palestinians with Israeli citizenship have been facing this even more so, but it's creeping in to Israeli society. And I'll also add that there's constant worry about legislation that is in the works. It's still unclear, but there's all kinds of laws and that are kind of under discussion that will be targeting Israeli and Palestinian NGOs and their funding, as other laws that seem to be an attempt to target activists. But again, all of that's in the works, and there is kind of this general feeling of holding our breath to see what's going to happen. And when you think it can't get worse, it just gets worse. So that's definitely the environment that people are functioning in.
Can we talk about the Center for Jewish Nonviolence? What kind of actions have you guys been involved with through the CJNV? And what sort of options are there at the CJNV for actions? For example, can you talk about the Hinenu program and how it works?
Yeah, so CJNV has been around since 2015, and I go back to the start just because our programs, our actions have shifted a bit over the years.
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, and basically the first delegation was a tree planting delegation. There was a Palestinian farm in the Bethlehem area that had hundreds of trees uprooted by the army, and the owner of the farm invited Jews to come replant those trees, understanding both the symbolic and material meaning of that. And that was the first delegation. CJNV came out of that, and then sort of continued from there in terms of the delegation model for a number of years. And that basically looked like 9 or 10 days, bringing a group of, let's say, 40 people here. There's obviously some political education and touring and meeting people that's very important just to understand the context and see what's happening here. But it was always important for us that there would also be work projects, or what we call like projects that support sumud, sumud being steadfastness or existence as resistance. And yeah, in Area C of the West Bank, if you work a plot of land that hasn't been worked and that's close to a settlement, that's actively resisting. So we would, recognize, if we have a group of 40 Jews, we're able to maybe access that land in a way that the Palestinians wouldn't be able to on their own. So on a delegation, there would always be work projects, then we always had a direct action component as well. And it usually had that same kind of material gain logic to it, that if we succeeded in whatever the action was, there was some sort of material victory, with the recognition that odds were the army was going to stop it, and then there would be hopefully a symbolic sort of achievement that could be gained out of it. And we ran delegations like that for a few years until COVID. And once COVID hit, the airports were closed, delegations were not possible anymore. So we talked to our Palestinian partners, mostly in the Masafriata area. That's where we've had the longest standing relationships and some of our strongest relationships are. And they asked us if we could. We said, yeah, we can't do delegations. What should we do? And they asked if there was any way we can bring people to be in longer term solidarity presence. In Masafriata specifically, but in the West Bank in general, there's a long history of solidarity presence of Israelis, but also of internationals who come here and spend a chunk of time in the ground on the ground in the field with Palestinians, whether it be shepherds or farmers or what have you. And that the whole international side of that stopped with COVID. And we were asked if there was any way we could bring people. So we organized the first Hineni group then, and it was a group of people living abroad who all had Israeli citizenship. And it happened to coincide with an Israeli collective of activists who were also in conversations with us about how to meet this gap, this vacuum of solidarity activists. And Hineni has continued since then. So that was in February 2021, and it was during the 3 months of the shepherding season in Masafriata. That's the main economic livelihood of the region. And unfortunately, it's also the time when there's the highest friction and tension between with settlers and with army. And Hineni has continued every year since then. So bringing a group of activists, usually a much smaller group, 6 to 8 people who stay here for 3 months, and are in daily solidarity activities. A lot of it is accompanying shepherds and going out, but also responding to incidents, a lot of documentation work. And again, trying to recognizing that if a Palestinian is alone or is attacked on their own, maybe we have a chance, if we're there with them or if we're able to show up, to decrease the intensity of the violence, or maybe even prevent the violence from happening, or at least push back against the just enormous isolation that the occupation system creates. And then in the past couple of years, we started also organizing groups to come for the olive harvest, which is more in the northern West Bank, but is also a really key economic time and cultural moment in Palestinian society, and also a time of increased settler attacks and violence and aggression. And in general, I think so those are sort of the 3 main ways of acting that I say we have, ways of people plugging in, but we're also constantly in conversation with our partners and constantly adapting. So even though the delegation model continues in some ways, it's shifted every year and looks a little bit different each time based on what's possible, what's appropriate, what's needed and asked for. Hineni, similar olive harvest as well. And there have been other attempts at different kinds of actions along the way over the years, but those are sort of the main things.
Incredible work you guys are doing. Absolutely incredible. I have Dina, if I can get into, I don't know, more of a philosophical bent here. So many of us have seen this, amazing Oscar-winning film, No Other Land, which manages. I think one of the things that's great about it is that it manages successfully to differentiate between something that both of you alluded to earlier, the relative freedom of Jewish participants. For example, Yuval Abraham, who's one of the Israeli directors of the film and one of the 2 primary focuses, how Yuval Abraham is able to leave Masafriata whenever he wants, whereas the Palestinians are stuck there. And so the 2 very different lived experiences in this activism. Can you tell me about a couple of things. Tell me about how the sort of necessity for Jewish or Israeli involvement in Palestinian liberation. Why do you think it's necessary? And then talk about how the Center for Jewish Nonviolence maintains an ethical practice around prioritizing Palestinian voices and agency. In other words, how do Israeli and Jewish volunteers decenter themselves during the work?
Yeah, small, easy questions.
Sorry.
No, important questions. I mean, in terms of Jewish and Israeli participation in Palestinian liberation work, I would say, and this is actually connected to the second question, that it's one, necessary because it's something that is being asked of us by Palestinians and by Palestinian activists that we work with, by Palestinian communities that we work with, which connects again to the second question. Like everything we do and something where we try our best and our hardest to constantly be centering in our work is following the lead of our Palestinian partners. Again, activists throughout the West Bank, on the ground, and thought partners, as well as the communities that we work in. And it's like a constant presence and effort, at least at CJNV, but I'll say amongst most Jewish and Israeli activists that I know and that we work with. And everything we do is by invitation. We are not looking to be kind of parachuting saviors. That's not the role we're trying to play. And yeah, I mean, I think in the end of the day, Israel today is a Jewish state, and the apartheid system is predicated on the fact that there are Jews here and that Jews are allotted many more rights than anyone else in the land. And, Zionism and the way Zionism is upheld today, as almost like a state religion, really relies on the upholding this narrative that Jews and Palestinians are kind of fundamentally opposed and could never possibly get along, not even get along, but be in the same place without violence. And I'm being a little simplistic here, of course, but and that this narrative justifies what is happening because Jews and Israelis can't be safe in this land, according to the narrative, without an apartheid in place. And I think, and I personally think, again, my personal view, is that like our work and something that I feel strongly about is creating a different reality and demonstrating a different reality, and that an alternative reality is possible, and that Jewish and Israeli safety is actually dependent on there being safety and justice and equality for Palestinians as well, and kind of turning this narrative on its head, and that the future of everyone here is however you envision that future in terms of the way things can be set up, but that the future here is dependent on bringing down the apartheid system. And so I think that Jews and Israelis are critical as part of this struggle. And of course, that doesn't negate the fact that we really strive in everything we do to follow the lead of our Palestinian partners and come where we are invited and requested, and we're honest about who we are, and not forcing ourselves into anywhere that maybe we're not asked to step into, and conscious of our role and our position and our privilege and the way kind of we move in the spaces we move in. It's difficult, it's complicated. There's Um, you're not going to get everything right all the time. You have to also be ready to receive criticism and kind of internalize it. And, it's not an easy thing. It's not a quote unquote sterile environment. But yeah, I mean, we try our best um, and yeah, I hope I answered your question the way you intended it.
No, that's great. Do you have anything to add, Oriel?
No, I think that was really solid. Yeah, and maybe I would just say, like, I think one thing that's true for us is we don't take what we do for granted. Like, it's always possible that this work might not be wanted anymore, might not be needed anymore, and that's okay. And almost to the point of redundancy. Like, Hinenu, it's very clear every single time, without any question, that the Palestinians and Masafra want us to continue bringing groups. And we still, every single time, check, like, hey, what do you think for next time? Should we do Hinenu again? What needs to change? And are very ready to hear the answer that actually it's not possible. It's not the right thing anymore, for whatever reason that might be. That could be political, that could be the circumstances around. There's so many reasons, but yeah, always keeping the option open that we might have to change what we're doing, might have to stop what we're doing, we might have to reinvent what we're doing because the folks that we work with, the folks that we're in solidarity with, ask us to.
Right. This relates to what you just said. Have you guys become more or less hopeful during your time working with CJNV? And what does the future look like in the near future and the distant one in Palestine? Or let me rephrase that. What would you want the future to look like?
Now it's the hard-hitting question.
Yes, sorry.
Before it was the easy ones. Now it's
you knew it was coming.
Yeah.
and somehow I'm unprepared every time. Go ahead, Oriel.
I think in terms of, yeah, overall the situation has only gotten worse. I think the more you see it, the more closely you get to it, it feels deeper and darker in many ways. And I will say that I think the work that, yeah, being connected to the work of CJNV, to the Israeli activists around, the other just activism in general, like there are moments of hope. There are moments of accomplishment, feeling possibility. I'd say the overall trajectory is probably more darkness and more despairing, looking backward. And with these blips of like, wow, look at what's possible when this type of solidarity exists, when these types of relationships exist, when people can show up or we can bring people in this way. It can be really powerful and inspiring, I think, yeah, for myself, but I think also speaking on behalf of the Palestinians that we work with and what I've heard them say about the actions that we've done together. So trying to bring a little bit of optimism and hope in, because I do think overall, and in terms of thinking about the future, like the situation is really quite grim. Yeah, I mean, to be totally honest, I think before October 7th and maybe the year and a half, 2 years before, I would have these moments driving around Masafra or while we were sleeping there, spending time there, of wondering to myself, will these villages be here? Will my friends still be here in 10 years, in 20 years? And not having much confidence in that. And then I think after October 7th, the just intensity and scope of violence and settler havoc skyrocketed, and that timeline shrunk to months. Like I remember the feeling in, yeah, late October 2023, November 2023 of, wow, are these villages going to make it till next summer? I think I feel a little bit back to the place of like, I don't understand how 10 years is possible, how 20 years is possible, just because life is so constricted and suffocated. Not only in Masafra across Area C especially, but the West Bank in general. And yeah, I think we talk a lot about how it feels like we are, we're trying to slow down ethnic cleansing. We're trying to provide whatever support we can to help communities stay another day And obviously what we can do is pretty small, but again, as Dina said, like if it's being asked for, we're going to keep doing it. And that's, yeah, in many ways it's recognizing that you're fighting a losing battle. And I'm trying to think of a nice way to spin it, but I don't know that I have one, to be honest.
So it's kind of, it sounds like it's kind of living day to day. It's like what can be accomplished each day rather than a kind of goal-oriented, future-oriented ethos. That's what it sounds like to me. Is that an accurate characterization of where you're at?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a greater vision or a greater orientation or impulse that I think orients what we do, orients why we do this. And that, has to do with people being able to live on their land, live freely, live with dignity, live with equality, without these systems of violence in place. But in terms of the day-to-day, it does feel like it's really about, are we, to take it to the most sort of minute and material, like, are we able to support this one shepherd in going to that one piece of land again today, and then next week, and then next month?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say that I think that's informed by, I think since October 7th, everyone in this land is a little bit in that mode. And especially in the West Bank, and everyone is kind of, I think no one that I know feels the ability to plan for a few months from now. That's too far away. Who knows what will happen? But and tomorrow as well is unknown. And I think most people I know, there's no ability to plan. There's kind of a sense of impending doom. It's really, I would say, a very, I mean, of course, difficult time, but like in terms of, I think psychologically and on an emotional level, people are in a really difficult place. And I think that also, because of what's happening every day, and that definitely informs our work and what we're, our day to day as well. Given that our work is kind of really completely tied and dependent on exactly what is happening that day and that week and whatever it is. But yeah, I just to emphasize what Oriel was saying, that I think the one thing that gives me something to kind of hold on to are the relationships that we have um, with the people we work with, but I mean also beyond work. I mean, these are places that I've been coming to also before I was working at CJNV, and both of us have really kind of deep personal relationships with the people that we work with, and also beyond the people that we work with. And I think um, when you have relationships like that, it ceases to become like, it's not really, not that it doesn't matter if you're hopeful or not, but it doesn't uh, influence whether you do the thing or not. Because once you are close to people, they're your friends, they're the people you care about, they're the people in your community, then it's not really like, you will still go and do the work, even if it's completely hopeless, even if it is a losing battle. Like, you don't, not that everyone has a choice, but it feels like, you don't have a choice. You're gonna just let the people that you care so much about just kind of deal with it on their own? No. And so that is something, and maybe that's a little bit more like, I feel like I kind of try and delve into the kind of more pragmatic kind of, I don't know if that's pragmatic, maybe that's not pragmatic, kind of more tangible, because it's hard to think about a future now. I mean, I think both of us can talk for probably a long time about, the things we want to see here and the things that we believe could be here. But at this time, I think it's it's hard to let your brain go there, because if I feel like personally on an emotional level, if I let my brain wander there, then the heartbreak is so much more painful in the minute to minute, and I kind of in order to keep going. And the day-to-day is difficult enough. And again, as Oriel said, like a lot of our work is trying to sometimes we say like hold the line. Um, and that, you can't let your brain go there always in this reality.
It's interesting though, because, kudos to you two. I think that a lot of people who do political activism need a positivity, need little victories to keep going. They need hope, a sense that what they're doing has concrete, positive impact. I'm sure that you guys get that in a day-to-day basis in your activism. I'm not hearing that though. Can you talk about little victories a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, one, I'll say that there is a lot of, feeling immediate impact. I think it just depends what kind of impact we're talking about. The kind of impact that we don't see is necessarily a huge impact on, what the army and the settlers do. And so a lot of I think one of the biggest struggles in our work, like for us as activists, is battling the feeling of futility, because you go out every single day with the same shepherd, you face the same settler, the same soldiers that are at his beck and call, the same decision is made every single time that the Palestinian must leave the land, and the settler wins every single day. And that's meaning, and again, I'm generalizing here, and there's all kinds of different scenarios that we deal with on a daily basis, but I would say futility is something that and something that we talk a lot about with our volunteers, because I think it's something that's so felt. So in terms of impact like that, it's hard to find the victories in that. But I will say that the impact is felt elsewhere, which is why I was talking about the relational aspect of things. I mean, I remember like right after October 7th, there was panic across this land, and essentially most kind of the like everywhere was entered into like lockdown mode. In the West Bank, it was a literal military lockdown, and but also in 48 there was a sense of lockdown. No one had really any idea what was happening right in the beginning. And the situation in the West Bank, and in Masafriyat in particular, but in general in the West Bank, the situation became very, very dangerous quite immediately. The military imposed a lockdown, and what happened was many settlers were deputized into the army, um, or entered into reserves or given guns, and they started forming these kind of militias, and they started kind of wandering in Masafriyata, wandering around, and going from community to community, raiding the community, attacking people, um, threatening them that, if they didn't leave in X amount of time, 24 hours, 72 hours, they would come back, they would kill them. And there were all these threats being made, and there was really a sense of panic. A lot of the other organizations that are around evacuated their volunteers, not only in presence work, but also throughout the region. All kinds of international bodies were evacuating their people. And there was a lot of conversations amongst activists, like, should we be still going down? Like, everyone wanted to be present, but some of the communities told us, it's really dangerous right now. We think you should not come. We will tell you when to come back. We are all staying inside. We think it's too dangerous for you to be here. And I remember there was 2 weeks right after October 7th that there were very few activists around. A couple Israeli activists still managed to kind of get in, but generally we had kind of paused activity at the request of the Palestinian communities that we work with. And at some point, there were so many communities attacked in the way that I described by settler militias. 2 weeks in, one of our kind of strongest community partners, the village of Susia, was attacked in a similar way. And I think that was kind of a breaking point where everyone, the Palestinian communities we work with, as well as the Israeli activists who were, did not evacuate, they were still here generally. There was kind of a collective decision that even though it's so dangerous and even though it's honestly terrifying, and we're talking about like live fire if you step foot outside the village, live fire at anyone that, the army or the settler militia doesn't, know who they are. And so we're talking about a very, very tense, dangerous situation. But after this attack on Susia, there was kind of this decision that we have to go back because what's happening is communities are starting to be forcibly transferred. Because with these threats that were ongoing, several communities, I think, Oriel, correct me if I'm wrong, like between 10 and 15 communities kind of decided that they had to pack up and leave because of the threats and attacks in this 2-week period. And so when everyone came down, I remember Oriel and I came down with many other activists, and we all met in Susia, and there was a gathering of many Palestinian kind of elders, community members, and this was the morning after the attack that they had been through. And there was this conversation like what's going to happen, and I would say that the environment was like frantic, like hectic and frantic, and nobody had slept the night before, and people were so afraid. And I remember we're sitting and we're talking, and maybe like 30 activists made their way to Susia from 48. And so there was a feeling of, there was a lot of people around, and we decided to stay there that night. And I remember the next morning that, you know, of course, everyone was still afraid. The situation had not significantly changed, but the kind of feeling in the air was different. The children had slept through the night the first time in many days. People were a little more calm, and we could discuss our plans. And I think that is the kind of material impact that we do see every day. The impact of not letting people be alone, the impact of people feeling like they're seen, that what they're going through is being witnessed. And we definitely see, sorry, I'm going back to the point that after that 2-week period, kind of all activity resumed out of this feeling of we can't actually stay away and let this happen. The flight of communities came to a stop. And the settler militias, that while they were still roaming around and wreaking havoc, that kind of violence lessened in terms of that exact kind of thing. So that is the kind of material impact that I certainly feel quite frequently, and those are the things that I hold on to.
That's enormous impact. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. That's astounding. Do you have anything to add, Oriel?
No. I think Dina said it very well.
Thank you guys so much for engaging with me today. Your work is just astounding. Just to close off, so just brass tacks, how do interested people get involved with CJNV? And would you guys have any, I know this is potentially a big question, but any specific advice for, say, a quote, new recruit, unquote?
Well, yeah, I mean, if people want to get involved on the ground, we have the Hinenu program, the Olive Harvest, and then sort of rotating programs depending on the need. And you can find out all that information on our website. Of course, social media, email lists, that sort of thing. We are pretty specific in that we bring people within a set frame. So if you're just trying to come here and get plugged in, it's also possible, but it is more difficult. And we have this specific container.
So this is cjnv.org. That's
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, David. Thank you. Appreciate it. I will say one of the things we started doing a lot more of in the last few years is, we have privilege in our bodies and being able to physically be there, but we also have a lot of privilege and access in terms of being able to move resources to communities, and we've done a lot more work to support communities with fundraisers and that sort of thing, and currently have a general fund open for Masafriata. that is to respond to these sorts of incidents that Dina was alluding to, like when settlers attack and homes are damaged or cars are destroyed, or when Palestinians are arrested and need to be bailed out. It's hard to gather those funds, especially quickly. So we have a general fund that we've coordinated with the activists in Masardiata they make the decisions about where the money goes in coordination with us. So that's another option. You can find out more information about that. Like I said, we have this access and ability to gather resources and also support our partners and the communities we work with in that way. And it's a great way to do that from abroad if you're not able to be here on the ground.
Thank you so much. Dina, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll say that in the past 2 years we've had a lot more interest for people who want to join us on the ground. I will say though that like there's still much to do, in all of our respective home communities, which is not less important than joining us on the ground. And there's definitely still ways of connecting with us, even if it's not, physically here. But we are happy to be in touch with people who have ideas, who want to, run a community event or host a conversation or some kind of, campaign. We're happy to be in touch about things, about project ideas, because we recognize that, if some people can come here and join us, and that's super powerful, and that's what we're going for. But actually, for Jews around the world, I mean, the most important work is to be speaking to their communities and the people around them, and trying to kind of start this conversation and bring forward the work. And so we're happy to be kind of in touch about things that are also maybe outside of the exact specificities of what we normally do.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for taking time out today to be on our podcast, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your days.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're very honored and happy to be here, and appreciate the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Well, we've come to the end of our show. We'd like to thank you for listening, and we'd like to thank everyone who made our podcast possible, including United Jewish People's Order Executive Director Serena Sarin and our guests Oriel Eisner and Dina Chizhik. This podcast was recorded at Walt Whitman Studios in Toronto. The theme music was composed by Serena Sarin with help from me. My name's David Wall. Until next time, seid gesund.